Hi everyone, welcome to Salesforce Topics channel. In this session, we will see a couple of trigger examples and how to identify which trigger event is apt for the given requirement and the implementation part of the requirements. Before going into the trigger examples, let us have a look into the small application that is VJ Mechanics app. This app has one custom tab that is for service request object, and the fields of the service request objects are SR number, status, vehicle number, type, free service, bill amount, owner name, owner email ID, city, and comments. For this, we are using this custom object. This object has all the fields that we have seen in the screen. Now let us have a look into the requirements. We have 3 requirements here, and these are all the 7 trigger events. Among these 7, we are going to select one apted trigger event for each requirement. The requirements are: during the creation of service request, if the status is not selected, then default the status to received. That means if user forgets to select the service status while creation of this service request, then we have to default it to received. And the second requirement is, during the creation of service request, display an error if in case bill amount is not 0 for the free service. That is, if it is a free service and if user enters some amount, then we should display an error saying that for the free service the bill amount should not be greater than 0. The third requirement is, on creation of the service request, send an email with a service request number to the owner of the vehicle. That means soon after creation of the service request, we have to send an email to the vehicle owner's email ID that we capture here. If you see, all these 3 requirements are talking about the creation of service request. That means we are going to insert a service request record into the service request as object. So we are sure that the DML operation for these 3 requirements is going to be insert. Hence, we can filter out remaining trigger events. Now we have only 2 trigger events, that is before insert and after insert. We will see which is the apt for each requirement. For the first requirement, if you see, we need to update the service request object with the status as received in case if it is not selected. In after insert, if you see, the new and the new map are both are read only. We cannot update the status as received because these variables are read only since it's already saved. So we have to select the one which does not yet saved. That is, before insert is going to be a perfect because it is not yet saved, and we have new and new map where we can update our values in this new and new map because it is not read only. And once you update the status as received here, it is going to take that value and Salesforce saves that value at this save step, and it continues the further steps, and finally it commits the record. So the apt trigger event for this requirement is before insert. Let's see the second requirement. In this requirement, we have to check 2 fields, that is bill amount and free service. And if bill amount is entered and free service has been checked, in that case we should not allow to create the service request itself. For this, if you see, after insert is happening after saving the record. But for our requirement, we should not allow Salesforce to save first of all. So we should not go for the after insert trigger event for this requirement. It is better to go for the before insert, because after our validation in our custom code, then we will hand over the record to the Salesforce so that it can save and then commit. So the correct trigger event for this requirement is before insert. The third requirement is on creation of service request, we have to send an email. For this requirement, as we are not updating any fields on the current record and we are sending an email, it is better to send an email after saving the record. So it is better to select after insert for this requirement. So the best trigger event for this requirement is after insert. Now let's get into the implementation part of this requirements. For this I am creating one trigger. Trigger name is service trigger, and we are creating this trigger for our S object, that is service underscore request object, custom object. And for this requirement we need before insert and after insert two events. So I have added another event also. Like this we can add all the 7 trigger events if required for our trigger. We have written this trigger syntax and we have selected the trigger events. Now we have to look for the trigger context variables. We know how Salesforce populates the trigger context variables for before insert, and the values will be like this. To know how Salesforce is populating these values, I have explained it clearly in my session 1. Please go through that session 1. And for after insert, the trigger context variables are going to be like this. Let me show you the practically what are all the trigger context variable values that we are getting for before insert and after insert by having this debug statement. Let me deploy this. I have opened the developer console to capture the logs. Now let me create one service request. Email ID, gmail.com, and if I save it now, because it is going to insert this record service request, system fires two events before insert and after insert. I'm clicking on save. The record got inserted. That means it would have fired the before insert and after insert. That means it fires before insert trigger here, and inside the same transaction at here it fires the after insert trigger event. Since we have written our debug statement here, in the logs it should have printed twice, one for before insert and another for after insert. Now let me open these logs and filter out only debug only. Now here if you see, these are all the before insert trigger context variables, and then here we have after insert trigger context variables. First let us look into the before insert trigger context variables and its values. As we discussed, it is populating only is insert as true, and as it is a type is before, it is populating before is true. And if you see, only the new has the values, and it has the new values that we entered in the UI. For example, bill amount we have entered 1000 and the email ID we have entered. Now we have these two requirements to be implemented for before insert. So let's implement these two requirements first for before insert. Here if you want to execute the code block for the before insert alone, then we have to separate the code using any conditional statement. Here I am going to take switch on. We have the operation type. The operation type is going to have the value as before underscore insert, and here we can implement our two requirements. As we discussed in session 1, instead of writing our entire code here, it is better to go for the trigger handlers. Over there we can write the methods and we can make use of those methods here. Let me create one class with the name service request trigger handler, and in this class we are going to implement our requirement. So let me write one method. So let me give the name of the method as service request validations. Let's see what are all the parameters that we can send for this method. So here if you see for the before insert, we will have only the trigger.new and remaining all the values are null. Mainly we need only these 4 variables, but for before insert we will have only the value on trigger.new. So let me pass the trigger.new as parameter dot handler dot method that we have written. And here let me pass the trigger.new and capture it in here. Like, what is the type of this trigger.new? That is, it is a list having the service request records. So the type is list of service request new SRs. Now let us implement our requirements here. First take the first requirement. During the creation of service request, if the status is not selected, then default the status to received. In this variable we have the new values, and over there if the status is blank, then we have to assign received. That means in this new we have the list of service request, and we have to iterate each service request and check the status field. If it is empty, we have to assign as received. Please note that though we are inserting only the one service request, Salesforce gives us in the list format to handle the bulkification. So let me iterate this new service request so that we can handle our requirement for each and every service request. I'm taking as service request in new sorts. Now let me check whether user has entered the status or not. So for that we can check by accessing the status field. That should be blank. So I'm taking string dot is blank. If the status is blank, then we have to, if the status is blank, then we need to assign the status as received. So I am assigning it to the value received. That is all. Now Salesforce will take care if status has not been populated during the insertion. It assigns the received value to the status, and as it is a before insert, at the next steps we have the save operation and commit operations. So it is going to commit with these values. So it is going to commit with the status received in case status is not entered. Field name is service status. In the field name. Now deploy this. Now it got deployed. I'm deploying the trigger as well. Now let me create a new service request. I'm not going to populate the service status. I'm just entering other values whichever required for this. So vehicle owner's name. So the vehicle owner's name, email ID. And once I click on save, though we have not selected the service status, the before event trigger logic has to populate the received status for this service request. I'm clicking on the save. Yes, it got populated with the received status. With this, we achieved the first requirement. Let's take the second requirement where we have to display an error in case if we are entering the bill amount for the free service request. As we know, this is also part of the before insert trigger event. I'm going to implement this requirement also in the same method. So in this same method, anyway, we are accessing each and every service request. At this place, we can write our logic. If in case service request is free service, that means service request dot free service is true is checked, then we have to see bill amount is greater than 0. So what we can do here, we can write and condition and service request dot field name is bill underscore amount is not null, and if it is greater than 0, then we have to display an error. We can display an error by simply adding the error message to the service request record. So let me add error message using this method. Add error, bill amount should be entered for free service. And if we add the error here over here, Salesforce will take care to display that error in the form. Let me deploy this code. Deployed it. Let me create new service request. This time I'm going to enter the status, and this time I'm making it as a free service, and intentionally I'm entering the bill amount. I entered the required fields. Now on click of save button, it has to display an error because we marked this service request as free service and entered the bill amount. Yes, it is returning an error saying that bill amount should not be entered for free service. What if you want to display this error message over here at the place wherever this error message is belongs to? For that, instead of adding the error message to the service request, what you have to do is you have to add the error message to the field, that is whichever field you wanted to add this error message. In this case, we can add the error message to the bill amount. So let me deploy this change. Now if I click on save, it prints the error at the bill amount field. The implementation part of these two requirements are completed. Let us now look into the third requirement, that is on creation of service request, send an email with a service request number to the owner of the vehicle. As this requirement we need to implement under after insert, so we have already added the trigger event over here. For this, we can write the operation type is going to be after underscore insert, and within this block we can write our logic. I'm going to implement this requirement also inside this trigger handler. So over there I'm going to create a method. So the method name is send email on SR creation. Let's see what are all the parameters that we can pass here. For after insert, if you see the trigger context values that we get from the Salesforce is new and new map. In the after insert we have id, so Salesforce is able to populate it in both the formats, list and map format. So we will send these two parameters from trigger to handler so that these values would be useful during our implementation. I'm going to call this method by passing two parameters, trigger.new and trigger.newMap. And over here, having those two parameters, one is of type list and another one is map type, id as key, and the parameter name I'm taking as new source map. Now we can implement our logic in this method. Now we have to capture the email ID that is entered by user. That means we get the email ID in the trigger.new. By iterating the service request, we can capture the email ID. So now let me iterate the service request. Over here, we can collect the email ID. We capture into the email ID. To send an email, we have an helper method where we can send the email ID, subject and HTML body. It will take care of sending an email. So I'm making use of that method, send email, email ID, and the subject is going to be this request has been created. And in the body, we have to send the service request number. So what we do is your service request number is yes service request dot that. Let me deploy this code. Since we have added this line, we have to deploy this trigger code also. This is the mailbox. Now let me create a new service request. I'm entering all the required fields. This is the owner's email ID, and on click of save, he has to be notified with the service request number, that is system generated service request number. Now the service request has been created. This is the service request number and this number has to be sent to this email ID. Now let's check the email. He got one email. Let me open that, and he got the email with the service request number. Please note that I am not explaining the send email over here because we are just concentrating on the trigger logic. Here we can implement any logic. Instead of sending an email, any required logic we can perform. Here I have taken sending an email. With this we have implemented after insert logic too. Please observe that is executing is true for before insert and after insert because this trigger handler being invoked by a trigger. Ultimately, whenever this method is being invoked from trigger, this flag is going to be true, and whenever this method is being invoked by web service or visual force page, that time we will get is executing flag as false. Thanks for watching. We will meet in the next session.